All right, don't say anything.
Okay.
And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts, somewhere towards the end of the sixth season, and we are live on YouTube. If you're following along, thank you for being here with us. Hopefully, we're going to talk a lot about the Missouri Basketball Tigers. On your right is the one, the only, the incomparable Matthew J. Harris. Matt, how are you?
Really need to stop looking at a computer screen after the last week. Watched entirely too much basketball, so I think after we're done here, I'm just gonna have to go sit in a dark room and let my eyes rest a little bit. But I'm fine otherwise. I can't complain. Or I shouldn't.
The missus had a question about how much you were actually watching, and the answer scared you a little bit.
Yeah, I'm looking at the final tally here. I think I hit 31 games across 7 days, I think, something like that.
Jesus, that's a lot of basketball.
Yeah.
Well, you are appreciated for the amount of game film that you chew through in the off season. So we're going to go ahead and kind of get into this. Basically, sort of starting with, I guess, the most relevant news, which is that Missouri's 2024 recruiting class had movement, I guess you could say, today, when I'm going to pop up here and see how well our graphics package works. But Dallas Thomas, who is a top 100 four-star kid from Arkansas with Missouri offer, a guy that you and I both liked a lot, he committed to Clemson. So he is not going to be a Missouri Tiger. He will be a Tiger. In fact, he had an 80% chance in his top 5 of being a Tiger. I believe it was Memphis, Mizzou, LSU, Clemson, and Arkansas. So 4 Tigers and a Hog. But he did go with Clemson. You did write about his his potential commitment. So what is Missouri losing here without Dallas Thomas on board anymore?
I hate comps because I think sometimes it sets unreasonable expectations, and sometimes I think they're still kind of helpful shorthand. To me, he was sort of a guy who, if you were to just look at him on the hoof, maybe would kind of give you some reminiscent or some reminder of what a Brandon Miller kind of looked like. Really long, really lean, perimeter oriented. Like, he's going to be called a stretch 4. We call him a jumbo wing, but if you watch him play with Brad Beal Elite, a lot of time spacing out, a lot of time playing on the perimeter, really not a 4, more of a jumbo wing, really a guy who is reliant on catch and shoots at this time, a lot of time, spacing to the corner, a lot of time spacing to the opposite slot, where he's going to, spot up. Brad Beal Elite has a couple of really good point guards that they will put in the middle of the floor and have them drive, and they'll kick to him. They can play off the, post with Leighton. I'm looking here. Name's escaping me right now. Somerville, a Rutgers commit, more of a back to the basket big. They play off of him. So a lot of what he got this summer were catch and shoots. Still not a guy, though, if you just look at his frame, though, that really has a lot of strength to catch, rip through, and drive. Not a guy that at this point I would say you could really have a lot of creative power. You would have wanted him to kind of come in, be a guy who could give you some shooting, some length on defense. He's sound defensively, can play within the team concept. But realistically, I think a lot of people are probably going to say that sounds a lot like Trent Pierce. And that's kind of the vibe you get when you watch him. Doesn't mean I didn't like him. Doesn't mean that, he's, not a guy who could have helped. But he's a guy that you were probably going to need at least a year of waiting for that physical sort of development, waiting for the strength program to help him, and then to see, what you can maybe get out of it. But they already sort of have a developmental, kind of hybrid as a sophomore in Aiden Shaw. They already have a developmental hybrid in Trent Pierce. So kind of a lot of overlap there if you were to just look at skill set, timelines, things like that. Still a really great prospect, really like his game, but, you were starting to kind of get into a question of, don't we already have 3 of these on the roster if he commits? So really hope he does well at Clemson, though. It seems like they did the thing that you want to see a school do, and they really prioritize him. They really put his development first. Brad Brownell is sort of always on the hot seat there, but he finds a way to develop guys like in that weird kind of funky 3-4 mold. Like Hunter Tyson right now is having a really good spring, or having a really good NBA sort of summer league stint with the Denver Nuggets. So
yeah,
tough to miss, but you can kind of understand, maybe the fit issues and maybe why he's headed to the ACC.
Well, and I think as anybody who's listened to, this podcast before and heard me talk about Trent Pierce, a lot of the same things I was saying about, Dallas Thomas. He's a guy that I personally like, that, I think getting longer and more athletic on that kind of 3-4 hybrid spot. Because really, those are the guys that, I see Pierce as a guy who will probably see the, spot minutes at the 4 once he bulks up a little bit, or, at least gets stronger. But ultimately, he's comfortable on the wing. And I think when you kind of look at Thomas in a lot of the same way, he's not quite as big as Pierce, but he's still a guy who, I think sort of fits that, what you're maybe looking for in your 3 through 5 spots, which are guys who can handle the ball, aren't really going to be your primary ball handlers, but, guys who can space the floor, shoot, play defense, and move without the ball. And I think he kind of fits in that mold. Now, that said, I mean, I'm with you. I definitely understand when you look at how the roster is stacked at the moment. It certainly, it's understandable why he might look elsewhere. I think, Missouri, when you look at who else is on the board and where kind of Dennis Gates was spending his time, in summer league, and who he's spent his time watching, it didn't really seem like Thomas was a guy that they felt like they really needed in the class. Where you definitely get that feeling, with Barrett, with Boswell, and certainly with Honor Batang. So, I if you end up with a class that has Honor Batang in any shape or form, I think you consider that class a win. He's a guy that I think is going to fit into any roster right away and impact it early as a freshman. So I would say disappointed a little bit that maybe we didn't get in a little bit more time to see how the class breaks down before you maybe lose a guy who I thought was gettable in Thomas. But certainly some key guys back on the floor. So we're going to keep experimenting with some of our features here. But we have comments, and so it's kind of nice to since we're talking about recruiting. Actually, I appreciate Bradley sent this in before we even went live.
Thank you, Bradley.
But he said, essentially, Mizzou will only take 3 players, or he had heard that Mizzou is only looking to take 3 players in this high school class. Do we agree with that? And if you had to choose who the next 2 would be, I think Batang has to be at least one of them if you're making a dream scenario. I'm not convinced that they're only going to take 3. I think it depends on key factors. So for one, they're comfortable with T.O. Barrett. But if you can add T.O. Barrett and Boswell and Batang, are you then I think you're probably looking at adding 4, right? You probably want somebody with at least some size. And if Peyton Marshall comes on board, are you going to turn him down? I think it just depends on a lot of things here.
Yeah, I always sort of say the baseline class for me is 2 to 3, just because they're probably going to have minimum of 6 spots that they fill, 7, I think 6 or 7. they've shown that they'll dip into the JUCO ranks. This is also supposedly a really good year in the JUCO class, or at least that's what I heard from a couple of JUCO guys last month. Was there's some real nice talent coming through? There's going to be a little bit deeper group in that top 10. This has been a group that's shown that it's willing to go into that rank to get at least a depth piece. So if you assume that there's going to be a JUCO guy, maybe that comes in at some point, you're at 3 to 4 there, and there's always sort of roster churn that's going to happen. And they'll probably have to look at 3 to 4 transfers. That's a long way of saying I think 2 to 3 is probably the good floor for where they're going to be. I think you want to take 3, sort of every year. That's a good safe bet. If you looked at where they spent last week, Dennis Gates, I think I'd have to double check the stream again, but watch Marcus Allen live, watch Bishop Boswell, I've watched Honor Batang live. Was supposedly in Houston where Ryan Jones, a guy who they've offered, is playing, and was taking in him. So there's 3 to 4 right there that they're sort of looking at, and they haven't kind of chopped the list down at this point. So I think 2 to 3 is probably a good window. I think Bear is obviously in the mix. Boswell is a definite take. I think I would still put Boateng in there, and then realistically, can you find a big, whether that's Peyton Marshall or it's Trent Burns? I think that's probably the best case to go. I think it would be hard for me to see them going north of 4, though. I think 3 to 4 would probably be the most expansion you'd see, unless it's just like a dream class scenario where John Bull calls you back and says, I want to come too. I think 2 to 3 is probably the floor. 3 to 4 is probably, where it would expand to after that.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of, in the same place. Like when it comes to who you're adding, when you're adding, that's going to play a key role. I think they would like to take a big, but if you miss on kind of like your top 3 or 4 targets, whoever those guys are, which I think we all kind of assume at this point, like they are recruiting Marshall. That and you just mentioned his name, Ryan Jones.
Yeah, Jones is more of he's more of a 4, more of a hybrid 4.
But he is a guy who sort of emerged. He was offered by Gates and by CY prior to their Missouri days. Gates actually was one of his first offers at Cleveland State.
Yeah.
And so the relationship that has been there a long time, but he sort of fell off our radar, and I don't really think we considered him as a potential ad, but he did mention Missouri in sort of a recent article.
Yeah, he mentioned that Missouri, has been in contact. He's set 4 visits, so I think the question is, would Missouri get a 5th visit? Out of that spot. I still think the bigger targets are do they want to try and get Trent Burns on campus? Trent Burns has said he wants to get to Columbia. Peyton Marshall said he maybe wants to take a second visit to Columbia. Auburn has sort of fallen out of that race. It looks like it's Georgia Tech, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Missouri at this point for him. So, I think they'll want a big in there. Common Mocker is another guy, or Common Maker is another guy who's had an offer for a couple of months. Didn't see anybody watching him in North Augusta at Peach Jam, but had a really nice week for the Oakland Soldiers. He's another guy that's sort of on the board there. But I think they'd probably want to take a big. But again, I think the names I'm going to continuously keep an eye on are Bishop Boswell, Honor Boateng, and Marcus Allen. What are they going to do and sort of that to round out the perimeter spots there, and how they want to fill in those.
So Tyler wants to know why recruiting side hasn't hired you to evaluate talent, Matt.
They're very smart, and also my wife would murder me. My wife.
They also don't necessarily pay all that well, and Matt has a comfortable living in Indianapolis. I think
if I took, with my wife murdering me, if I took that job,
it would gone all the time, going to different recruiting events, or at least gone most of the off season, and then attending some basketball games here during the season.
Yeah. For those who don't know, my wife works for the organization group here in Indiana, and works uh, on recovery teams and does, 2 to 3 24-hour health shifts a week. She's not gonna be like, "Hey, you're gone to watch basketball." No, she'll just find a different husband. She'll, like, trade me in and and be like, "No, we're done with you." No, I don't think anybody, needs that or wants that with me working for a recruiting website.
So, kind of getting back to what's next for Dennis Gates. Very clearly, we've laid out who the priorities are. I think Boswell is as high on the list as Botang is. They seem to have kind of like this list of like 3 to 5 bigs, where if you're comfortable taking like a common maker guy or somebody like that versus a Trent Burns who did sort of struggle in some minutes. So like I think once you're kind of getting past a few of like your top targets with that guys, you're probably comfortable waiting
To
to
the
see
portal.
what unearths in the portal in the following spring. So
Yeah.
I think a minimum they probably take 3 with Barrett. But I would say if they end up with, I mean, if Botang and Boswell and Marcus Allen all want to commit, like, are you going to turn them down?
We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
that sounds like a tough problem to have.
yeah, that's a good problem. I think that's the one that Missouri fans would like them to have. It's the thing you begin to get into once you sort of Matt Watkins and I have looked at this, and it's very wonky, and I'll try and be very, very straightforward. When you look at percentage of minutes played in the in different metrics, Torvik's like player rating system, or you even look at Evan Mia, or even if you just use points per possession, if you look at percent of minutes and efficiency, realistically, the bottom begins to drop out in terms of impact guys around 50 or 60. Once you get past that, the typical freshman is probably it's really rare if they're playing more than 12 or 14 minutes a night. And if you get outside the top 100, it's especially rare for them to clear 8 or 9. You know, this is a coaching staff that has clearly, acted in a lot of ways like a JUCO coaching staff where they're going to go get guys that can come in and play right away, and they don't overburden the roster with too much developmental guys. If you get into a situation where you miss on primary targets and you're taking 3 or 4 guys, but they're all guys that are probably lower than like 100th or 120th in the composite, you're really taking up a lot of roster spots with guys who aren't going to be able to come in historically and give you a lot in the rotation at
Mhm.
that point. So realistically, if they get into a situation where it's at 2 to 3 and they're having to start to reach into 140, 150 in the composite, you're better just pocketing than that and going to the spring and just looking in the portal or looking into the JUCO market if you want to try and find a depth piece. So that's sort of the thing
Yeah.
I look at is realistically, I'm kind of cutting it off at number 90 in the composite. If once you get past that, it's probably smart for you just to tuck that away and go see what you can do in the transfer portal in the spring and see how you can augment.
Yeah, and I do think it's worth noting, within that kind of phrasing that one thing to kind of keep in mind with the 3-man class that just came in is all those guys were really kind of sold by the staff as
They'd have to wait.
being developmental pieces, and understanding that this first year is going to be a lot of developmental time for you.
Yeah.
They're going to try to find the minutes, they're going to try to get them in where they can, but really kind of looking out at their second season as the season where you're going to take on a larger role. So we do have a question where asking if it's fair to say if Honor Batang is the number one priority on the board at the moment. I mean, yeah, I would say so. From what we've seen with how Dennis Gates and Kyle Smith Peters have been tracking Batang and making sure that they're visible for her, his games. Uh, if there's a top spot, maybe it's him and Boswell.
Yeah.
it certainly seems to me like, but that would be like 1A and 1B. I don't
Yeah.
like. I really think that they're prioritizing Batang as much as you can. And with Arkansas lurking, one thing to kind of keep in mind, and I know that Matt knows as well. Also, the difficulty with Arkansas recruits tends to be that a lot of those kids grow up in Arkansas and grow up rooting for the Hogs. But Tang did not grow up in Arkansas. Like, his parents are not from Arkansas. They came to Arkansas.
Yeah.
And so that's not as big of an obstacle to overcome. I mean, look, Eric Musselman, for all of his weird faults and shirt removal, has proven to be a formidable recruiter and a good program builder. At the same time, he's also quick to throw players under the bus, and certainly will go to the portal and get somebody with more experience over using some talented freshmen. So I think you're going to be concerned that Arkansas is in there and hanging around, especially with NIL stuff as well. But I don't think this is like a thing where it's like you're fighting an uphill battle, trying to recruit against Arkansas.
Yeah. Boateng's parents are, academics. One, I think, works at UALR, and the other one is at the University of Arkansas's medical school in Little Rock. So, they relocated to take those jobs. So they, Little Rock is home, but it's not home for them. The other thing is Boateng has been very clear throughout his process that he's, staying home is not like a big thing to him. Like, he's going to go where he's going to get, he says, and, if you do any backgrounding on him, he's sincere when he says he's going to go someplace he's going to get a good education. So I think that's going to be the thing that matters here is, what's the academic environment going to look like? And I think it's going to be, really realistically, what's his staff relationship look like? That said, Arkansas, he fits very well what Arkansas wants to do, where he can, be a dominant one-on-one player. A lot of what Arkansas does, they structure their offense to create a lot of ISO situations or one-on-one situations where guys can win those matchups, and Honor Boateng can go win matchups. So I think if you worry about Arkansas, you worry about the stylistic fit. Muss has also been really, really good at, if it's an in-state priority, like a Nick Smith when Nick Smith isn't hurt, or Moses Moody, or even kind of a Jalen Williams. Those guys will find a way into minutes. If Honor Boateng was Dallas Thomas, who is in the 60 to 70 range, you'd start to worry a little bit for him. Muss has shown that, if you're not a top 30 level kid, Arkansas ties may not matter so much. He's going to play guys that want to play. He just lost 2 guys who were in-state commits this spring, to the transfer portal because they didn't see the floor and there wasn't going to be a path there, and they got recruited over. So I think the thing you worry about more is that, Boateng will look at Fayetteville and see, all right, if I walk in here, the system's going to be structured for me. There's a history of guys like me getting touches. But I don't think it's an affinity for, I grew up calling the Hogs. I think if it's Arkansas, it's because there's a really, really good scheme fit and personnel fit for him there. That would be the thing that would worry me more about Arkansas.
Any other recruiting notes you want to hit on before we move on from the topic?
No. It'll be interesting to see what timelines look like moving forward here, but I think we've covered just about everything we need to cover here.
Aaron Rowe, 2025.
Aaron Rowe was too good last week, and that's a problem. Very, very good. Told a couple places that he's going to take fall visits. He's taken 2 unofficial visits to Missouri, but he's going to take an official visit in the fall. Also going to take an official visit to Tennessee. Not a surprise given the connections that Tennessee has to Mo Cannon, to Link Academy. Not a shock. And look, if you're a point guard that wants to play fast and have a ton of freedom and have the ball in your hands, Alabama's a place that's going to do that. So those are the 3 places that he says he's going to take visits in the fall. I'd also keep an eye on Kansas State. a member of their staff, Rodney Perry, used to be the coach at Lincoln, used to be the 17U coach for Mocan. So those are kind of the four that I would keep an eye on. But he keeps playing like that, he's going to have bigger fish milling around him in pretty short order. He was really, really good last week.
All right. Well, yeah, so he should be on campus probably in the fall. I would expect Missouri to be very much in the mix until the end. Whether or not they have the pull to kind of get him. It'll be a long run.
He's going to be a top 20 kid.
It'll be a marathon.
Yeah.
So our next topic here, Matthew, on Thursday or Friday, whatever it was, I released I set out on Twitter to kind of start getting responses for the top 8. It's one of my favorite things to do in the off season, because even though we both sort of had this understanding of this is a deep roster, and Dennis Gates would like to play more than 8 guys. We expect him to play more than 8 guys. The reality with it is someone is going to get more minutes than others. And so the idea is essentially to reduce what looks like a deep roster into who you think is going to be the priority and who is going to get the most minutes. That does kind of leave a lot of things open for a lot of people. This is a roster with a lot of turnover. So we're going to, I think at this point we all, everybody seems to think Nick Honor's going to start because Nick Honor started all last year. So that's probably true. But the results were way more of a consensus than I kind of expected it to be. In fact, I'm going to get Levi worked really hard on this graphic. So I'm gonna.
Levi always works hard, and we just foul everything up. That's how this goes. Oh man, that's nice. That's nice, Levi. That's nice.
Yeah, it looks good, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So here we go. Is it?
I see it. I see it.
I don't know. It's still showing that it's loading. There we go. Boom. Top 8. The man that got all the votes on everybody's list was Nick Honor. I had 36 or 37 submissions. Nick Honor was on all of them.
It's not bad. It's not a bad bet.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it really is like he's probably the guy that even if there wasn't a huge production that you got from him. I mean, you did sort of at moments. You got him hitting big shots, but he's your fixture at point guard. Who's going to start is a good question. And I don't know that I know the answer. If I were guessing at this point, I think he's going to rely a lot on Caleb Grill. I think Noah Carter is going to certainly be there. And I feel like from what we know, John Tanji is probably the guy that's going to see a lot of minutes. Then I think you're probably looking at that last spot, and maybe you go small, and maybe it's somebody like Tamar Bates. Maybe you go big with Connor Vanover. Maybe you go athletic with Aiden Shaw. Maybe you go ball handling and Sean East. Matt, what's your take?
Nick Honor is going to be a stalwart. I think the hope is that Sean East shoots a little bit better this coming year. And can play himself into some more minutes and maybe a larger, more expansive role as a lead ball handler. But for now, I'm going to go with Nick Honor as a guy who I think is going to be, the incumbent at the point guard spot. I really think John Tanji, we've been pretty consistent in saying that we think John, was probably underrated a little bit because of how quickly he committed, the timing of it. And, realistically, there not being like a lot of rollout or sort of like, runway in terms of where reporting was, and guys really got to know him. But, John Tanji's a guy who averaged 13 points per game against top 100 teams last year. He did it on really efficient, shooting. He's a guy who, played in a system that has a ton of overlap with what Dennis and the staff do. Can do a lot of different things defensively. I wouldn't say he's a lockdown guy, but he can play 2 through 4 in a switching system for you. Just a guy that I think blends enough of the kind of stuff that you saw from Dree and from Demoy that you could play him into a spot there. So I sort of pencil him in as a guy that I think is going to see time. Noah is the kind of connector that they really, really like at that, nail and, or not nail, but at the top of the key and at the elbow. Will he play the 4? Will he play the 5? I think, again, that depends on if you want to play small. You can shrink it and do that with him at the 5. But, when he was at Northern Iowa and playing really, really well, he was more of a 4. So I could probably see him slotting into the 4 spot. So that had me pushing Vanover into the starting 5, just because I think he's a guy that's going to give you the kind of length that you need defensively. He's going to be accustomed to playing kind of in some of the coverages that Missouri wants to do. I think they may have to play some more drop coverage with him, but he's also a guy that, is familiar with some of the concepts they want to do in 5 out. So those would be sort of my 4 that I would consider stalwarts. The, combo guard spot realistically is Grill or Bates to me. What do you think you want to have at that spot? Do you want to have, just a pure floor spacer in that, spot? You've already kind of got a guy like that in John Tanji. So I sort of defer to Tamar Bates. He's a guy who's played in a little bit of that role. He's a guy too that has, plenty of high major experience, a little bit better on the ball defensively, or spent more time doing it than Caleb Grill. So then that leaves the 3 sort of bench spots to me are Sean East, Grill, and Aiden Shaw. Those are sort of, that's how I broke it down and really thought it would go. And, I think I could see if Aiden Shaw, is making a jump this summer and playing himself into some more minutes at the 4 spot or on the wing. But that's at least where I'm starting at this point.
Yeah. And I think, so I'm bringing up one of the comments here from Cameron, who basically, how do we think that the big rotation is going to play out, and curious to see what the uptick in Shaw's minutes are. And I think, like, when you're talking about like the playing rotation, I think to me, the guy that I'm most curious to see like what happens with him is probably Aiden Shaw. And the reason is, like, Aiden Shaw was a very limited offensive player last year. And some of that was by design. Some of that was, like, they're not asking him to do things that he's just not capable of doing yet. But you hope that he is able to kind of take the steps, this, off season to be able to do just, and not necessarily the kind of guy that you're going to throw the ball to, late in the shot clock, but definitely you want him to be able to, like, catch the ball in a kick out and attack a closeout.
Yeah.
Can you use 1 or 2 dribbles to go by your defender, on a rip and rip the ball through, get by him and get to the rim, or, just get to your sort of secondary area where you can either, shoot or pass the ball. And I think, like, that's kind of the next step, for Aiden Shaw. If he's able to do those things and do those things efficiently and effectively, then I think he's a guy who is absolutely going to be in the top 8.
Yeah.
For me, I was positioning him in the top 8 because I'm kind of guessing that he's going to be able to do at least some of those things. I hope he takes another step defensively. I hope he takes a big step as a rebounder. This is a guy who can impact the game in those kinds of ways. But if he's able to bring you those things, and he is able to kind of get a little stronger too, then I think that there are lineups where you could see him playing, minutes at like the 4 and the 5 spot, in some of Missouri's smaller rotations. But I certainly think, at least early on, we're probably going to see some healthy doses of Connor Vanover. And, at least when the non-con schedule is kind of, playing itself out, seeing Jesus Carolero as well.
Yeah. Really sort of interested in what the structure of the non-con looks like. Looks like they're not going to be able to do this sort of thing where they just loaded up 8 or 9 games in a row and, really just have enough, sort of leeway to tinker. They're going to have, some games early on. At least Memphis, looks like it's in the window where it's going to be a season opener. And then you're going to have to go to Pitt on November 28th and play a road game there. So they may have to, make some concessions and chop things down for that. But I think it'll be interesting to see if they go with the soft non-con again and really use that time to explore the space in their lineup combinations. Shaw has been a guy that we've talked about before. If the catch and shoots come around and he can, like I said, get to a catch, rip, go and get to the rim, that becomes a guy that, suddenly has some utility for you. At least is a guy that can come in and, give you some minutes probably in that 5th or 6th man spot. We'll see what he does there at this point. The other thing that's going to be interesting is, where do guys like a Kurt Lewis fit in? Smart of him to jump on an offer last January. It was a really, really rough spring for JUCOs in terms of getting, a lot of high major traction. So Kurt did a great job getting a spot locked down, but he's coming into a pretty crowded 2 and 3 spot there. If the shooting translates from, John Logan, sometimes I'm dubious on the stat keeping at JUCOs, but if the shooting translates, then I think you have a guy that could, play his way into some more minutes because you're going to need a guy who can knock down shots. Jesus Carolero, like the things you see on tape, you see the scheme fit and you see why the staff liked him a lot. But man, there's still stuff on tape against good teams where you're like, it's just, there's, just some decision making. There's some loose with the ball. I think there are going to be times defensively where he could get hunted a little bit. But again, this is a guy who effectively hasn't played for a year. So maybe he's going to walk in and just kill it in practice. But the history for guys like this, transferring up and becoming, pretty regular contributors is pretty scarce. So we'll see what those two do. But then we get into the freshmen. And, I think all these guys are aware that, they may be having to bide their time a little bit. But, if Jordan Butler shows that he can be a guy that gives you some, spacing and can give you some versatility as a 5 guy, maybe he plays his way in, instead of 8 to 9 minutes, closer to 14 to 15. If, Anthony, Robinson, shows that he can, be a pretty reliable guy that can spell a vet for 10, 12 minutes a game, maybe that's a guy that you can put in there and see what he can do. But I really think the swing spots are probably going to be, at least to me, does Shaw make a jump? Can Carolero, carve out a niche at the 4 spot or the 5 as an undersized 5? And then what's Kurt Lewis going to do? I really think those are sort of the 3 swing spots for me.
Yeah, so overall, the voting, Nick Honor, like I mentioned earlier, was on all 37 ballots. Noah Carter, John Tanji, and Caleb Grill were on 36 of 37 ballots. Aiden Shaw was 5th most at 33. And then Tamar Bates had 32. Sean East had 30. I have to think like Sean East not being on that many ballots is probably like an oversight. Which, I think when you're like listing guys, sometimes you just forget about guys. I think even in our chat with Matt Watkins on Slack, I listed my top 8 and I just listed 7 guys. It's because I left off Sean East. But Sean East was 7 with 30 or on 30 ballots. Connor Vanover on 30 ballots. And then 9th. So the first guy to just miss on just 11 ballots, that was Kurt Lewis. Trent Pierce had 6. Carolero had 4. Caleb Brown had 1. Ant Robinson had a couple. Jordan Butler, 0. No votes.
Yeah, I mean,
I wonder how many people that were submitting maybe listen to the show and we've convinced people that we probably won't see a whole lot of Jordan Butler this year. I still think it's possible that he's in the rotation. I don't think he's going to be in the top 8 minutes though.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to give minutes to these guys just to see what you have, just to have a baseline established, and if they can. That's the one thing I do like about this non-con schedule is even teams like Pitt and Memphis are going to be teams that are going to probably be at least quad 2 teams, but I think they're both kind of in the 60s to 80s of like what Torvik's projections. So those are still spots where if guys are playing well, you could try and feed guys some minutes against high major caliber teams. You're not having to the first time that they're gonna you're not gonna be debating going into Fog Allen. Do we need to give a guy some minutes tonight to really see where he is, or bragging rights? There's enough on the schedule right now to where I think you could have some controlled situations where you can put the freshmen in against some really quality teams that they've earned that and see how how well they're able to kind of tread water and keep their head up. But the one thing is when I've talked to all 3 of these guys, the staff was very clear about what the expectations were. Robinson knew he was going to be doing understudy work behind 2 veteran ball handlers this year. Trent Pierce knows he's got to put on weight. Jordan Butler knows that there's some things he's got to do defensively and strength wise. So I think again, it's easy for those guys to say those things before they get on campus and before they watch other guys play. But I think the staff has communicated to them very clearly, this is a year where we're going to try and, give you some time and see what you can do. But, it may be a de facto kind of red shirting situation. But if those guys defy expectations, that's found money. I think that was the one thing that this team didn't have last year was it didn't sort of have the flexibility, particularly down the stretch and particularly in the backcourt, to sort of adapt as teams kind of figure out how this team played. So, if those guys are ahead of schedule, even better. Again, it's a good problem to have if those guys have, exceeded expectations early on. I think that's something the staff would definitely not mind happening.
And it's also difficult for the team to play the way that they wanted to play because the bench got a lot shorter as the season went on. Not having, and not just missing out on Isaiah Mosley, but Trey Gomillion being unavailable for a lot of games. Ryan DeGray missing a lot of time. I just think once the bench got shorter, it certainly made things more of a challenge. For our
they were
guys.
basically 7 men deep by the time the season got into the home stretch. But they've at least, I think, as we've said before, solved some of that. Efficiency translates up, but if there's some overlap or it holds a bit, I think things get a little bit easier. I think they're going to have the 3 or 4 kind of extra bodies they need.
So we've been at this for 43 minutes. We do have a sort of one more question I think is worth kind of getting to at this point before we get out of here. I have to say I'm just admiring some of the names on people's YouTube's account.
Fantastic, all of you.
Question comes in from Boofin Tobacco.
Yeah.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Fair play. Fair play.
But Boofin, I'm assuming is the first name, wants to know, do you think this team's win more or less games last year? I think we both know the answer to that, just based on what we've seen in the non-conference schedule. It's going to be a tougher non-conference schedule.
Yeah, I just think it. Do you think they're going to be able to hit 3 kind of buzzer beaters again? They went 9-1 in games that were decided by 2 possessions or less. That's really rare. It's again, it was fun. I'm glad that they were an outlier. It was fantastic that was the result. It's just not something that's very repeatable. I think you can have teams that are resilient in late games. Teams, as we talked about a couple of years ago, there were a couple of games for Zoe where they ran the right play and a guy missed a shot. Like, what separated Missouri from having 2 or 3 quality wins on the resume and probably being in Dayton were Dree, banking in 2 shots and then Nick Honor punishing a guy going under a ball screen. Like, you can't foresee those kinds of, sliding door moments happening. But, we know kind of what the probabilities tell us, and those are really rare. So you take those 3 off the board. 22 wins is still a lot. Are they going to be able to, catch Kentucky as it's down again? I don't know. But, are they going to be, is Illinois going to, have apparently a locker room rife with drama when they show up to bragging rights? Who knows? Like, there's stuff, as much as we try and prepare for, there's always externalities that you can't account for. But just looking at, how things transpired last year, a little bit of the luck that was needed, or some good fortune. I don't know if that's repeatable. So even if this team is playing well, I don't know if circumstances will let them sort of, at least as I sit here in July 10, and say 25 wins is, I think it's going to be harder for them to hit that mark. But that's why they play games, and that's why we try and know as much about this team so we can understand how they play and what they're trying to do. But they're still going to throw the ball up and go after it. So we'll see what happens.
Sometimes you make a shot, sometimes you don't. I think it's going to be tough for them to replicate just the volume of wins that they had last year. And I think, to me, with the way that the schedule has sort of built up, I do think that there's still room to move up in the league. Move up, maybe a loose term. I still think like their league win total is like repeatable. I feel like they could do that this year. Whether or not that means they get the 4 seed, I don't know about that. But like the deeper roster should be more helpful, provided everything goes as planned, should help them more, down the stretch late in the season. So maybe if there's a couple of those games that got away from you, on the road, maybe you're more competitive and you can pull out a win. But I still kind of think you're probably looking at, best case scenario. And then most of this is also because we've been tracking SEC roster movement, and there are some, rosters of teams that are probably going to be ranked ahead of Missouri that I'm not all that impressed by. I think Alabama's a good example of a team that, they've done a lot of work, but how much better? I don't think they were going to be better than they were this year. It just, and it's kind of like the whole thing with Arkansas. Like, everybody's going to have Arkansas probably top 10, but they still don't have anybody who can shoot. So it's just one of those things where I think they could probably have a really good SEC season. I think the non-conference part is going to make things rockier. So even if they hit the same mark in the SEC, which I think is possible, I don't think they do that in the non-con. Going to
the way to look at it now is the tiers that I've seen most of the time when you look at way too early polls, and at least when I run the returning production numbers, I think you're going to see Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, and maybe Mississippi State and Texas A&M. Those are kind of, I think, the 6 teams you're going to see thrown around a lot. But I think the top 4 teams you're going to see a lot in polls and atop the league are going to be Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, probably A&M. The A&M one makes sense. They bring a lot of guys back. Those guys, they had a pretty good model for how they got wins last year. So I could see A&M being feisty again. I think Mississippi State's going to be potentially thrown in there because they bring a lot back, and we're conditioned to really, really value continuity and value returning production. Mississippi State has that. Auburn, I think, has at the point now where you just sort of trust Bruce Pearl. I have questions about that roster. I have questions about, the backcourt there and whether those guys have enough juice to get it done. But Bruce inevitably gets his team somewhere around 5th or 6th at minimum. So
we're just going to give KD Johnson another shot until
then. So realistically, I think there's going to be 6 teams here. Missouri, the teams I think that are going to be interesting to sort of evaluate and value are going to be, do you value Missouri? Because if you just looked at their 3-man recruiting class, it grades out pretty well relative to everybody else. Now, we've just said those recruits probably aren't going to play a lot, so you can discount that. Realistically, this is going to be, where do you value the transfer portal classes? And 2 teams that I think are going to be really, really interesting to monitor are Ole Miss and Missouri and maybe Georgia. Those 3 teams are kind of outside the next tier. LSU's in there, Florida's in there. But again, we saw LSU really raid the portal last year. They finished 13th. They kind of flipped the model. Is it going to be better? Florida went and got every big man on the market. Is that going to matter? As I sit here now, there's probably 5 or 6 teams I could see just getting in the mix for 5th. Like, I think it's going to be really, really clogged. And like we talk about, we don't really know where Missouri sits until we go through and pick everything game by game. It's going to, and last year it really took a 3-team tiebreaker for them to get to the double bye.
Yeah.
So it was really flipping 2 results that got them there. So I think they could win less raw games. They could win 22 or 23 games. It could still earn a double bye because of the way the tiebreakers work. So what's your,
and I think like that's
for success.
To me, that's always why I just go by like what kind of league record are you looking at? With the way the schedule becomes unbalanced, for me, the mark for them is probably going to be, making sure you get to 10-8 this year.
Yeah.
That's 1 less win than they had a year ago. But I think if you get to 10 wins, you're probably going to be an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, that's
provided you don't absolutely train wreck the non-con.
If you don't go with Texas A&M, if you don't do what A&M did a couple of years ago, if you don't tank the non-con.
And and Missouri's non-conference schedule is difficult enough with enough good teams that they won't get like punished all that much for losing to Kansas on the road or even Illinois on a neutral. If you can win those games, then obviously you're banking Q1s, and that's always a good thing. But to me, like, make sure you get to 10 wins, and I think you're probably safely in. So I do think they win fewer games this year than last, but I still think that, I don't know, maybe I'm just a believer in Dennis Gates. I think he has a really, really innate ability to get guys to play with a lot of confidence. And one of the things, so Missouri had their SEC takeover today, and I remember at this point I kind of flipped on for a little bit the Kentucky game, and you just see like Missouri just looked like they knew they were going to beat Kentucky. And I think when you're when you're looking at the differences in the rosters, like obviously Des Moines Hodge is playing well in summer league for the Lakers right now, and Kobe Brown was a first-round pick, versus but Kentucky had a lot of hype, right? And they always do, and yet one team looked like they were by far the more confident basketball team in that game. And so I think, like, if Dennis Gates has his finger on the pulse of this year's team the way he did last year, then I think you're talking like they should absolutely be back in the NCAA tournament. And I think that's probably the expectation.
Yeah, I mean, when I ran through, just using kind of like Torvik as a baseline, I think Torvik's probably going to have them at 8 and 10. We'll see what the other preseason expectations are, but I could see a lot of people probably slotting this group somewhere between 7 and 10 in the preseason. I think that's probably where I think we'll wind up seeing them. There's the home and road schedules in the SEC are actually pretty balanced. They have a pretty good home schedule. They get Memphis at home. We'll see if the Wichita State game is there. That may or may not still be on the schedule, but if they're hosting Wichita State, those are two pretty manageable home non-con games for them. And then that probably leaves just 6 to 7 bye games that they're going to fill in. But the home SEC schedule is Arkansas, Florida, Ole Miss, South Carolina, A&M, Auburn, Georgia, Mississippi State, Tennessee. That's a pretty good home schedule to get. Try and get your way and work your way to maybe 6 home wins there. I think the only teams they probably won't be favored against are, possibly Tennessee, probably Arkansas, and we'll see where Auburn and Florida wind up in the mix. But other than that, I think they could, at least have toss-ups or chances to get 5 or 6 home wins there. They're going to go to South Carolina, which is a game I think they can get. They're going to go to Vandy, which I think is a gettable game for them. So, again, it's always sort of thing of, where do you think they're going to be able to pick up wins? But, they got to go to Ole Miss, which is tough. It's a first-year coach there, even that's Chris Beard. The schedule, I think, offers them a path to 10 wins. Is probably the best way to put it.
Well, we're going to get out of here.
All right.
So everyone that's kind of still tuned in at this point, we are going to try to do more of these live shows, or at least record the podcast live. I like the interaction. I find myself spending a lot less time on Twitter, and I don't really trust Mark Zuckerberg to give me the kind of experience that I feel like you used to get several years ago in Twitter with that sort of interaction. I've spent enough time on Instagram and Facebook to know that I've had my fill of suggested posts. So I want to do more things like this, where we can interact with people who are excited and passionate about Mizzou basketball, even if it's just 10 to 15 people at a time. I think that's a good thing, and it allows us to kind of still be accountable and and interact and answer hopefully some good questions. So I do have to shout out a couple folks. First is my man Dustin in Cape Girardeau, coming through strong. You can follow Dustin, is at Maggie_Ringo_1 on Twitter. If you need help finding that, you can just go to my recent follow list. He is there. Dustin came through strong and got me hooked up with some side project release beers to a spot down there. So I'm going to meet up with Dustin here in the future and get my beer. I'm very excited about that. And speaking of beer, I had the pleasure of meeting Tyler, who is at TMaxMash on Twitter, at a side project release party for Rye Beer Barrel Time. This is getting really into the weeds of wonky beer nerd stuff, but Tyler, it was great to talk to you. I'm wondering, is that Tiger in the chat? Because we do have a Tyler in the chat.
Just make side project pay for ad space. Come on.
Maybe we'll record a podcast there. Who knows?
Sheesh.
One of these days. We'll have a. I almost wore my side project shirt. Yeah, so it was Tyler. Tyler in the chat said that was a good beer. Rye Beer Barrel Time, great beer. So we're done here. I don't know if we'll be back next week or not, but maybe a couple weeks. But I know before the box score, they're going to start doing some live shows, and we've got some cool stuff kind of coming along with I think Quentin, one of our new writers, is going to be doing some cool videos with our beat writers, all kinds of stuff on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed. And if you're not subscribed to YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast feed, because you're still getting all this nonsense.
Tomfoolery.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
See you, everybody.
Now we just got to end the